Leon Myburgh is Sub-Saharan Africa Strategist over at Citi, and of course we've got South Africa's sovereign bonds having recently been included in the World Government Bond Index. The markets have since seen large WGB bond purchases continuing to outweigh selling, and joining us for more detail on those kind of developments is, as I said, Leon Myburgh. Leon, thanks so much for joining us once again in studio. So a couple of days of us being included on the WGB, and the large purchases continue to show up in the data. Let's right at the top take a look at the kind of inflows that we're seeing and distinguish between local and foreign investor participation.
Sure. I mean, the first thing is when you look at the foreign investor participation, what we highlighted on Monday is that what we need to be looking at are the gross purchases by foreigners and how that has changed over time, because we've of course got foreigners buying and selling, and there's been increased selling. But the buying side gives us a story of how much money has come in on the back of WGB. And on Friday, Monday and Tuesday, the average gross purchase has been around about 11 billion rands worth per day. Now, the average over the last 2 months, since the 1st of August, the average gross purchase has been just over 4 billion. So that excessive purchasing that we've seen over those last 3 days equals roughly 20 billion rand. Now, it's difficult to say. It's somewhere between 20 billion and the full 30 billion that one has to say would be WGB related. But it gives us an idea of the types of inflows that have been around WGB, because it really are WGB buyers in the system at the moment. There's not anybody else here. The existing investors have tended to be sellers. And that puts us to a number of in excess of $2 billion, $2.5 billion of money that's come in on the back of WGB, which is fortunately slightly higher than the estimate that we had initially of around about 2 billion. And so it's been a very healthy inflow on the back of WGB. Now, at the same time, we've seen foreigners selling. So, example, on Friday we saw significant selling, nearly 11 billion rands worth of selling on Friday. That softened on Monday and went even softer on Tuesday. So, on a net basis, over the last 3 days, the net purchases by foreigners have been around about 9 billion rand. That's in excess of $1 billion. So I mean, this is these are healthy numbers. They're healthy numbers because of a lot of things. The market has handled these substantial big flows. Of course, we're now going into the settlement cycle where the trades that were conducted on Friday are settling today. I haven't heard of any noise on the settlement side of problems coming up. But now we're going into the systems, into the backroom engine of the bond market. Physically the changing of script and cash. Which now needs to flow well. And so far what we've had very good monitoring by the authorities, the regulators, the JSE, Straight. Everybody's been working very closely together to make sure that all the systems have been in place, and everything that's happened to date shows us that the systems have all functioned 100%.
Yeah.
Leon, it's great to see the systems functioning, and that's gratifying, certainly for our reputation overseas. But let's analyse exactly what has happened now. The front runners that came in April, or from April, knowing that we would almost certainly be joining the WGB, which of course we have. The front runners are now taking their profits, but are they taking their profits simply because of that, buy the rumour, sell the fact, or are they selling the bond market for other reasons? And are the WGB flows coming in simply because of technical factors? These funds overseas need to be in the WGB in order to track this index.
Yeah, I mean, to start off with the WGB flows, I mean, I think to a large extent it's technical. The WGB flows that have come in now are the passive guys. They have to buy the index, they replicate the index. It's technical. There's still a big component of WGB trackers who are active managers who may have chosen not to buy, and that money is yet still to come. Now in terms of the dynamics, I mean, we've had two sets of data that we need to, or events that we need to. First is a set of data which has unfortunately been relatively bad for South Africa, starting off with Marikana, the Moody's downgrade, the current account data, trade balancing. We've had a lot of negative data which has come out over the last month, and that hasn't helped the sentiment in the market, because it's highlighted the risk that the rand might be vulnerable to a sell-off, and that by extension could be inflationary. The flip side, yesterday we had Governor Marcus talk, coming up with very dovish comments, talking about the decision to leave the monetary policy rate unchanged at the last meeting was a difficult one. It sort of tells you that they were very strongly considering cutting the interest rates. Now, that would be very good for the front end of the curve, but the tail end of the curve might, the longer dated bonds might suffer because of concerns around the rand. And that's sort of the dynamic that we've got at play in the market at the moment. So over the last 24 hours, we've seen the yield curve steepen up dramatically as the longer dated bonds don't do as well as the front dated bonds. And the front dated bonds, of course, are very closely linked to Governor Marcus's reaction, because they're looking at interest rates over the next 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely. I mean, how are you rating sustainability of the kind of inflows we've seen? Because another thing that Governor Marcus highlighted was that she does not believe that the bond flows into South Africa are sustainable.
Well, there's two dynamics. You know, one is the relative yield of South Africa, and that stays attractive. Right? The shape of the curve is often cited as a reason why foreigners like to participate in the market, because you can buy a 10-year bond, and if nothing happens, yields are just gradually drifting lower and lower, which means that you make capital profits, and quite frankly, it means the market doesn't sell off. So I think from a yield diversification point of view, we're likely to see foreigners continue to look at South Africa as a possible investment destination. But the unfortunate reality is that in the short term, we are stuck with a number of challenges. And specifically political related challenges. And these do deter somewhat from money coming into the country. So I would argue that, you know, we've seen just over 80 billion rands worth of inflows over the last year. Of which, you know, 9 billion, you know, has now been related to WGB. I would argue we probably have to start thinking about some softening in that flow, and I would be sympathetic to the remarks that the governor has made, that we can't expect to see continued rush of money, especially if we're worried that the rand might become vulnerable, because, you know, if you buy a bond and you're funding it out of dollars, if the rand weakens, you're losing money, you know, so you have to be pretty confident that the currency is going to hold up as well. And this current account story, by the way, is not unique to South Africa. You're seeing it in a lot of the, you know, countries dependent on China.
Very, very quick one, Leon. If you have a look at the rand, it's 8.43 now. It was 8.23 3 days ago. There's various factors. There's the importer and the exporter flows. Of course, there's the yield chasers, the speculative people. There's foreign direct investment. There's the short-term portfolio flows. How much of an influence is the bond market on the South African rand versus, for example, the equities? And can we have a look at the rand at 8.43 and say, well, that's because there's been a disappointment in the bond inflows?
Well, I wouldn't think that there's a disappointment in the bond flows. I mean, certainly I would have estimated the yen-financed inflow to be in excess of $1 billion. And this is money which people, you know, investors sold yen and bought rand. What the issue is the amount of demand for dollars that's in the system. And I think that is where the equation changed. I think the WGB-related inflows were pretty much in line with expectations. Certainly the bond data that we discussed is to the upside of what my expectation was. The only difference is that I think the demand side, the dollar demand side in the equation has changed to the detriment of the rand.